Theresa May has warned of paralysis in Parliament and a risk of there being no Brexit if MPs vote down her withdrawal deal tomorrow. But Labour, the DUP and many Conservative Brexiteers say they haven't been won round by fresh assurances from the EU. Campaigners have given a broad welcome to government proposals to reduce air pollution, but say they lack detail and deadlines. The husband of the British-Iranian woman in jail in Tehran has revealed that interrogators tried to pressure his wife into spying for Iran. Also tonight we have a report from Zimbabwe, where the doubling of fuel prices has led to widespread protests, and at the Australian Open, a fight to the end by Andy Murray in what may have been his final competitive match. On the eve of her showdown with MPs over her Brexit deal, the Prime Minister has ramped up her central message that it would be dangerous for the Commons to reject the agreement. In the morning, Theresa May travelled to a factory in Stoke-on-Trent where 2.5 years ago nearly 70% of the population voted to leave the European Union. She warned that if MPs didn't back her, they would be behaving recklessly. Either the UK would leave without a deal or they'd betray the vote of the British people, causing catastrophic harm to faith in democracy.
While no deal remains a serious risk, having observed events at Westminster over the last 7 days, it's now my judgment that the more likely outcome is a paralysis in Parliament that risks there being no Brexit.
The Prime Minister said a letter published by the EU contained valuable new assurances about the withdrawal agreement. It stresses that Brussels does not want to use the so-called Irish backstop, which is designed to guarantee there will be no return to a hard border in Ireland. This afternoon in the Commons, Mrs May warned MPs they'd be judged by history. She urged opponents of the deal to give it a second look, arguing that it would protect the economy while delivering on the result of the referendum. But her usual allies, the Democratic Unionists, soon made it clear they hadn't been won round, and only a few of her Tory critics have indicated that they've been persuaded. A government whip, Gareth Johnson, has resigned to vote against the agreement. Our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, reports from Westminster.
The view, even among the Prime Minister's supporters, is that her deal will tomorrow be resoundingly defeated. Significantly, the Prime Minister herself, when asked, was unable to say she believed she would win, while her International Trade Secretary Liam Fox publicly conceded victory was now unlikely. Number 10, however, is desperate to reduce the scale of any defeat. To that end, the Prime Minister warned Leave-supporting MPs that if they rejected her deal, the likely outcome was no Brexit. She also hailed the reassurances offered by the EU on the Northern Ireland backstop, even though they're not legally binding. Under them, it was confirmed the backstop was intended to be temporary and the EU would seek to bring it to an end expeditiously. And in the Commons, the Prime Minister made this appeal to MPs.
People will look at the decision of this House tomorrow and ask, did we deliver on the country's vote to leave the European Union? Did we safeguard our economy, our security and our union? Or did we let the British people down?
However, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, who is himself under huge pressure to table a no-confidence motion in the government, was dismissive of the reassurances secured by Mrs May.
Today's letter is nothing more than a repetition of exactly the same position that was pulled more than 1 month ago. It categorically does not give the legal assurances this House was promised and contains nothing but warm words and aspirations.
A view echoed by the Deputy Leader of the DUP, Nigel Dodds.
5 weeks since the Prime Minister pulled the vote saying that there had to be legally binding assurance, will she admit that nothing has fundamentally changed? I mean, that's the reality. Let's not kid ourselves about that.
And regardless of the arguments over the backstop, some leading Brexiteers signalled they'd vote against Mrs May's deal for other reasons. The Conservative MP John Redwood.
Given that the EU intends to take huge sums of money and powers off us in return for just 21 or 45 months of more talks and massive uncertainty, why should we ever believe the EU would give us a good deal when they pocket all that they want up front?
Meanwhile, there are clear signs of MPs seeking to give Parliament a greater say in shaping a different Brexit deal. It seems, however, whatever the opposition Mrs May is facing, none of those putting forward any alternatives is any better placed to command a majority.
In the corridors, offices and tea rooms outside the Commons chamber, the manoeuvring has intensified. With the issue of Brexit cutting hard across traditional party lines and profound uncertainty about what lies ahead, MPs are trying to work out what might follow defeat for the Prime Minister. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth has been considering some of the possible scenarios.
As has been the case of late, parliamentary procedure could hugely influence how things play out tomorrow and beyond. Several MPs from all parties have tabled amendments, suggested changes to the Prime Minister's agreement, which will be voted on before the deal itself. The Speaker, John Bercow, whose role in the Brexit process has already proved contentious, will decide which of these will be put to the Commons. Then, once the debate's finished tomorrow evening, MPs will vote on the amendments he's selected in the order he's chosen. The one being most closely watched is from the Labour MP Hilary Benn. It rejects the Prime Minister's deal and a no-deal Brexit. If it's chosen and the Commons backs it, it's likely the meaningful vote would not go ahead because MPs would technically have already rejected Theresa May's agreement. If not, then the crucial vote will happen. And with a defeat widely expected, much focus is on what might come next. Officially, the Prime Minister would have 3 days to signal her intention to Parliament, and Downing Street has indicated there wouldn't be a huge delay. In the meantime, backbench MPs could try to influence the process. The Conservative Nick Bowles has suggested MPs could wrest control from the government, with backbench committee chairmen coming up with their own Brexit plan.
If the liaison committee comes forward with a plan, only if the Commons supports it in a way that it will not have done with the Prime Minister's deal by that point, then the government will be instructed to implement it. We live in a parliamentary democracy. MPs were elected in 2017, fully a year after the referendum. If we don't trust our elected parliament to come up with a solution, who do we trust?
Others from different parties are pursuing a second referendum, believing a parliamentary defeat would signal deadlock that only a public vote could break. Among them, the Conservative MP Dominic Grieve.
If people by majority still want to go, then go we must. And I'll just accept that's the end of it. What I can't accept is that seeing the mess into which we've now got ourselves, we should simply think that the easy way out is to leave in one way or another, when everything suggests it's going to be a bad outcome. And if people want something, then I think we ought to go back to them and say, could you please confirm this is what you want?
Meanwhile, Brexiteers point out that as things stand, by law, if the Prime Minister's deal is defeated and no alternative is agreed, then the UK will leave the EU come the end of March without a deal in place. The only certainty in this complex Brexit maze is that no one can predict with any confidence what will actually happen over the next few crucial days.
Jeremy Corbyn has told his MPs this evening that a motion of no confidence in the government is coming soon. Many Labour politicians have been pressing for a vote to be tabled swiftly if Mrs May's deal is defeated. Here's our political correspondent Ian Watson.
Jeremy Corbyn, and not his shadow cabinet, will decide the timing of any confidence motion. But at a meeting of his parliamentary party, the Labour leader told MPs not to be concerned, as he was preparing to table a motion of no confidence in the government soon. But with Northern Ireland's DUP so far refusing to back it, the confidence motion looks likely to fall, and with it, the opportunity for a snap general election. According to the policy adopted by last year's Labour conference, this would clear the way for the party to campaign for another referendum. But sources close to the Labour leadership emphasised tonight that a new referendum was not the default option. The current policy makes clear that alternatives would have to be considered. Party members might be consulted on the next steps, but a Labour leadership source emphasised it would be difficult to discuss every twist and turn of policy with the wider membership.
Our Europe editor Katya Adler assesses how the political drama at Westminster is being viewed in Brussels and other EU capitals.
Underlying the pages of EU assurances on the Brexit deal is arguably Brussels' real message, one echoing the Prime Minister's own, that their negotiated agreement is the only divorce deal on offer to the UK, full stop, end of story. EU leaders want to keep up the pressure on MPs to focus on the cold facts, that the deal on the table is the compromise result of 2 years of difficult negotiations between the EU and the UK government, built around the Prime Minister's red lines, leaving the EU's single market and customs union. But Europe will be following tomorrow's vote very closely. Will the deal be voted down, and if so, by how many? It's then and only then that the internal debate in EU circles will begin as to what happens next. The EU is unlikely to make any significant moves until the direction in which Parliament is going becomes clear. It'll want to see MPs uniting around one single amendment or clear alternative to Theresa May's deal. EU leaders hope to avoid a chaotic and costly no-deal Brexit, and there may be more wriggle room than they've wanted to admit even to each other until now, though there would be limits.
The story features across the morning's front pages. Out of allies, out of time is the Daily Telegraph's headline, which pictures a grim-faced Theresa May. Like every other paper, bar The Sun and the Daily Star, it leads with tomorrow night's momentous vote. Predictions abound about the scale of the loss which Mrs May could suffer. The Financial Times says there's a mood of impending disaster in Downing Street, with some of her allies suggesting the defeat could be more than 200, a figure which is backed by an analysis in The Guardian. The Times and The Telegraph suggest the number could top the 166 recorded against the Labour government of 1924, the worst defeat in any comparable vote. Unnamed cabinet sources have told The Telegraph that the Prime Minister would be expected to quit if there's a loss of this magnitude. But the Daily Mirror says an RAF plane is on standby to whisk her to Brussels for more talks if she loses. According to The Sun, Mrs May will tell her cabinet that the German Chancellor Angela Merkel has suggested the EU could grant extra concessions if the Commons rejects the deal. It says the Prime Minister will try to force a second vote even if tonight's result is catastrophic. The Daily Express and the Daily Mail both use front-page editorials to put pressure on the Commons to back the Prime Minister's plan. The Express warns MPs risk losing the public's trust forever, while the Mail speaks of Britain being on a precipice. Its message to those going through the lobbies is, put your country first. Environment and health campaigners have given a broad welcome to government proposals to reduce air pollution. Key elements of the plan include limiting emissions of ammonia from fertilisers used in farming and a ban on the most polluting wood-burning stoves. Ministers say the measures will halve the number of people breathing in harmful particles by 2025, but critics say they lack detail and deadlines. Our science editor David Shookman has been looking at the proposals.
Over the past few decades, Britain's air has improved dramatically. But one kind of pollution, nitrogen dioxide, is still at levels judged illegal by the European Union. Ministers are being far more outspoken than usual in recognising the dangers and the burden they pose on the health service. Michael Gove, the Environment Secretary, has published plans for England that will have implications across the UK.
At the moment, our air quality is damaging the health of thousands. So we need to take action, and that action has to cover everything from making sure that we reduce the roadside emissions that come from vehicles to making sure that the emissions that come from how we burn wood and coal, and also how our farmers farm, are reduced. It's critical to making sure that our nation is healthier and our environment is purer.
Wood-burning stoves are a target. Every hour they're in use, each one can produce more pollution particles than a diesel lorry. The problem is worst when the logs are wet, because the moisture makes them smoke and smoulder, releasing more dangerous air pollutants. But mindful of the popularity of stoves, with householders like Michelle Beat in Bristol, the government has stopped short of a ban.
I totally understand the need to restrain or try to protect the environment, so we try and use, obviously, logs that are seasoned, but I wouldn't be happy if I wasn't able to use it.
Another major source is traffic, and the government has told local councils to come up with plans for clean air zones. But some of them say they need more support to do that. James Lewis is deputy leader of Leeds City Council.
Very frustrating for us, and the government, despite the fact that all the work we've done is based on our best assessment of what we need to support it, the government aren't actually coming forward with the funding that we think is needed.
The key question is whether any of the government's measures will help. 3,000 children in London and Luton are taking part in a major study. Research has shown that the growth of lung capacity can be stunted by air pollution. Professor Chris Griffiths is leading the work and says the government's plans don't do enough to encourage electric vehicles.
The document talks about an infrastructure, but again, there's no target. It says, we will provide more charging points, but we don't know by when that will be achieved. So, will this strategy transform our congested, polluted inner cities and towns? As it stands, no, it won't.
The more research is carried out, the more scientists worry about air pollution. The issue now is whether enough is done to head off the worst impacts.
The husband of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, the British-Iranian woman who's in jail in Tehran, has said interrogators tried to pressure his wife into spying for Iran. Richard Ratcliffe was speaking as his wife began a hunger strike in protest at being denied medical treatment. The Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, has described her ongoing detention as totally unacceptable. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has always denied the charges against her. Here's our correspondent, Caroline Hawley.
Richard Ratcliffe says this is a high-stakes moment for his wife. He says she's in fragile health after more than 1,000 days in jail and has suffered in captivity from depression and panic attacks, as well as neurological problems and lumps in her breasts. She's demanding written confirmation that she'll be able to have specialist medical care. Mr Ratcliffe has also revealed that Iran's Revolutionary Guards tried last month to get her to spy on the UK government, in particular on the Department for International Development. It was that, he says, that pushed her over the edge.
She was stunned and terrified, and they said, listen, it would be safer for you and for your family afterwards if you cooperate with us. So it felt like a real attempt to assert power and assert menace, if I'm honest.
This afternoon, the Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt summoned the Iranian ambassador, delivering what officials have described as a tough message to Iran, warning of consequences if Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe doesn't get the medical treatment she needs. Mr Hunt said it was a truly terrible indictment that she'd had to resort to a hunger strike. But Iran has already hit back, with the ambassador quoted as saying that interference by the British government is unacceptable and won't help her.
Police in West Yorkshire have arrested 55 men in connection with claims of child sexual abuse in the county. The men were detained over a period of several weeks. The allegations date back to at least 10 years ago. From Leeds, Danny Savage reports.
The investigation centres on allegations made by 7 women of sexual abuse committed against them as children. They say it happened mainly in the Dewsbury and Batley area between 2002 and 2009. Last November, West Yorkshire Police started making arrests, which continued into the new year. The men were detained in Dewsbury, Batley and Bradford. All 55 have now been interviewed and released under investigation. West Yorkshire Police says safeguarding and protecting children remains its top priority.
Tear gas has been used against protesters in Zimbabwe who've taken to the streets after it was announced that fuel prices would more than double. President Emmerson Mnangagwa has insisted the measure is necessary to deal with chronic fuel shortages, but critics say it's an insensitive and provocative move which could spark a humanitarian crisis. Our correspondent Shingai Nyoka sent this report from the capital, Harare.
The anger and frustration was clear as demonstrators made their views on the price hike known. Many blocked roads in the capital's townships with boulders and burning tires. A police vehicle was pelted with rocks as the protesters marched towards the city centre, seeking an audience with authorities.
We must leave because we are tired, we are hungry.
We are protesting because it comes to a time where things are now hitting. You see, people are suffering.
You must care and you must listen to the people. You must be up, not above the people. You must listen always.
In the south, in Zimbabwe's second city, Bulawayo, police fired tear gas on the crowds in what are the worst protests since Emmerson Mnangagwa was sworn into office last August. Zimbabwe's economy has struggled for more than a decade, the legacy of a financial collapse during the Mugabe era. President Mnangagwa says the severe fuel shortages have been caused by rampant illegal trading and increased consumption. He insists he's been forced to act and has promised special measures to help poorly paid government workers. But the opposition Movement for Democratic Change has condemned the move, warning it could prompt a humanitarian crisis. President Mnangagwa is currently abroad, visiting Russia and Asia. Many here believe he should be focusing on issues at home instead.
President Trump and President Erdogan of Turkey have discussed the creation of a safe zone in northern Syria amid increasing tensions about the fate of Kurdish fighters in the region. Their phone conversation comes after days of threats and counter-threats between the US and its NATO ally. Earlier in the day, Turkey stressed that it would not be deterred by a threat from President Trump to devastate its economy if it attacks Kurdish forces. Our correspondent Gary O'Donoghue reports from Washington.
During a telephone call, President Trump seems to have dialed back some of the sharp rhetoric that's been bouncing back and forth between Washington and Ankara. In an account of the conversation issued by the White House, he acknowledged Turkey's concerns over the situation in northeastern Syria, but also stressed America's view that Turkey should not mistreat the Syrian Kurdish fighters, known as the YPG, and other members of the Syrian Democratic Forces who've been in conflict with IS. This is considerably more temperate language compared to a weekend tweet in which the president threatened to devastate Turkey's economy. That rather wrong-footed Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, who was asked what the president meant during a news conference in Saudi Arabia. You'll have to ask him, was Mr. Pompeo's response. As for a safety zone for the Syrian Kurds, the Secretary of State's trip is designed to win support for just that.
We want a secure border for all of the parties, not even just the Turks and the Kurds. There are Arabs, there are Christians in the region. We want that to be a place where there isn't violence, as there's been over these past years. There are still millions of displaced persons in that region too. We want to take that violence level down so that we can begin to return the displaced persons to that region as well.
Relations between Washington and Ankara have been seesawing for some time, though Turkey has said it's not totally opposed to the idea of a safety zone. But that amounts to no more than a starting point. What it is and who enforces it are questions without answers right now.
A British man has been murdered on the Caribbean island of St Lucia. He's been named locally as Robert Hathaway, who was 66 and owned and ran a marina. His body was discovered at his home in Groselay by a neighbour yesterday. The Foreign Office says it's supporting the family and is in contact with the St Lucia police. Tens of thousands of people have held rallies across Poland to mourn the mayor of Gdansk, who's died in hospital after being stabbed at a charity concert. Pawel Adamowicz, who's 53, was on stage when he was attacked. Police have arrested a 27-year-old man. In Gdansk this evening, the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, who was born in the city, addressed the crowd.
Today I want to promise to God, the people of Gdansk, Poles and Europeans, that for you and for everyone we will protect our Gdansk, our Poland and our Europe. That hatred will not prevail. We will stand up against it.
A diamond ring worth more than £1 million has been seized by the National Crime Agency as part of its continuing investigation into a woman from London who spent £16 million in Harrods. The ring was found at a jeweller's by investigators looking into the source of Zamira Hajieva's vast wealth. She's the first person in the UK to be subjected to an unexplained wealth order, a court measure designed to uncover suspected corrupt money hidden in the UK by foreign officials and their families. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Dominic Kashiani, has more.
Zamira Hajieva's husband is in jail in their native Azerbaijan for committing a massive fraud against the state bank he used to run, and she could lose her London home, which is just behind Harrods, if she can't prove her vast wealth in the UK was paid for with legitimate earnings. Last Friday, the National Crime Agency seized an 8.9 carat diamond ring bought by her husband for almost £1.2 million. The ring, which has a special emerald cut to create a Hall of Mirrors effect, had been left with Cartier for repair, but it will now be kept by the NCA for 6 months, while investigators look into how it was paid for. Mrs Hajieva was not represented at today's short hearing at Westminster Magistrates Court. She is due back in court later this year as part of her ongoing battle to avoid extradition.
In the city, the 100 share index ended the day 63 points lower at 6,855. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones closed down 86 points at 23,910. On the currency markets, the pound is up 0.7 cents against the dollar at $1.29. Against the euro, sterling is up 0.5 cent at €1.12.4, making a euro worth 89 pence. Andy Murray has produced a battling performance in what could be his final match at an Australian Open and in his professional career. He was beaten by the Spanish player Roberto Bautista Agut, but pushed him to 5 sets, despite being visibly in pain from the hip injury that's forced him to announce his imminent retirement. Our sports news correspondent Andy Swiss was watching.
And from Great Britain, make some noise for Andy Murray!
So would this be the final bow? Andy Murray emerged to a wave of sentimental support, but limited expectations, and at first they seemed largely justified, as Roberto Bautista Agut took the first 2 sets. Murray, though, was increasing in confidence, and roared on by his watching family, he launched a thrilling comeback, winning 2 tie-breaks to set up a deciding set. Finally, his hip injury seemed to take its toll, and Bautista Agut eased to victory. But this was a performance full of Murray's familiar grace and grit, and as he struggled to control his emotions afterwards, he did offer a glimmer of hope.
If this was my last match, like you say, amazing way to end. I gave literally everything I had. If I want to go again, I'll need to have like a big operation, which there's no guarantees I'll be able to come back from anyway, but I'll give it my best shot, and thank you. Thanks again. Cheers.
Murray later explained he would either rest until a final appearance at Wimbledon, or he would have more surgery, which will improve his quality of life, but which could prevent him from ever playing again. He said he would make his decision in the next week, but if this was his last match, it was a fitting goodbye. A player renowned for his resilience, fighting right to the very finish.
Women have taken 9 of the 16 prizes at tonight's Writers' Guild Awards, which recognise talent across theatre, TV, radio, comedy, books and video games. Among those to receive awards at the ceremony in London were Heidi Thomas, the writer of Call the Midwife, and Phoebe Waller for her thriller series Killing Eve. The award for Best Sitcom went to Mackenzie Crook, who wrote and starred in the show Comedy Detectorists. The name Harriet Cohen may not be immediately familiar, but in the 1920s and 30s she was one of Britain's leading concert pianists. She inspired composers including Elgar, Vaughan Williams and her lover Sir Arnold Bax. She also composed music herself, yet 50 years since her death she remains largely forgotten. Now 4 of her compositions have been recorded for the first time. Our arts correspondent Rebecca Jones has been listening.
Lively and lyrical. This is one of Harriet Cohen's 4 Russian impressions, recorded for the first time since she wrote them more than 100 years ago. Harriet Cohen was an accomplished concert pianist, but she was also a bewitching beauty, admired by men from Albert Einstein to D.H. Lawrence. For 4 decades, she had a passionate, if turbulent, relationship with the composer Sir Arnold Bax, inspiring many of his compositions, including Tintagel. She once said she saw music as a form of communication.
Music is a sort of speech. You're talking, you're telling in a new, strange language.
But as a composer, Harriet Cohen has been largely overlooked. The pianist Mark Bebbington, who's recorded her music, thinks she's been unfairly neglected.
We know of other female composers who were also sidelined because of their gender. To have been a successful female concert pianist would have been acceptable, but to be a successful female composer would have required so many extra hurdles for her to have gone over.
Mark Bebbington hopes recording her music will bring Harriet Cohen to wider prominence. But while it's known she did compose many other works, those scores are all lost.
The headlines again. Theresa May has warned MPs that if they throw out her Brexit withdrawal bill in a crucial vote later today, they risk paralysing Parliament. She's urged them to back the deal for the sake of the country. Jeremy Corbyn has told Labour MPs that a motion of no confidence in the government is coming soon. Environmental campaigners have welcomed government proposals to reduce air pollution, but say they lack detail and deadlines. The husband of the British-Iranian woman in jail in Tehran has revealed that interrogators tried to pressure his wife into spying for Iran. BBC News.